morning or good afternoon, everybody. Welcome to our webinar today on the topic of integrating Cherwell with Active Directory. We hope this broadcast comes to you safe and healthy wherever you may be joining us today. Our speaker is going to be Eric Kruger, who's a principal consultant with StrataCom and one of the leads in our Cherwell practice. A couple of housekeeping items before we begin. We will be recording this session. It'll be made available to you to rewatch. You can also share it with anyone in your organization you think may be interested. We're hoping links would be available sometime for those in email. If you have any questions, we have a questions panel to submit those questions. Eric will be posting slides so that and we'll have an open Q&A at the end of this session as well. If you find a little orange box with a that'll expand all your panels and you should see the questions there. With that, I'm going to turn it over to an overview of our organization, StrataCom, in case you're and we'll jump right into our topic today.
Okay, sounds good. Thanks, Laura. And if you have any questions after, you can email Laura, or if you're working with Steve Day, you can email him, or if you want to find out more about us or some of these offerings or view some of these previously recorded webinars, you can go to our website. Just a little bit about StrataCom. We were founded in 1997. That's all we've ever done is ITSM. We used to call it Help Desk. We've been a Cherwell partner for 8 or 9 years now. We've got 16 certified Cherwell consultants on staff. We do host this Cherwell Advanced Practitioner call. So if you know other people that might be interested in listening to these, we try to do one every other month or so with some good information in it. Email Laura, or they can email Laura and get put on the list. I think we had about somewhere between 150 and 200, like in the 160s or 170 sign up for this. So I see about a third of the people are signed up are on right now. We've got a couple other complementary products. We have a mobile client for Cherwell, our Kanban boards for Cherwell, and we're working on a lower environment sync utility, a utility that will allow you to sync your production environments down to your lower environments. So you can stop doing the SQL restores to keep your lower environments in sync. And then our Active Directory users, teams, and workgroups integration pack, which I'll discuss a little bit today as I'm talking about how customers integrate with Active Directory. And we have a few maps, customer approvals in red, which is kind of like a JIRA type app. Requirements, enhancement, defects are two most popular. Just a little snippet, a couple of gifts of our mobile and our Kanban clients. I'm sure if you've been following StrataCom, you've seen these products, but if you're interested in mobile, the product is on the left. And if you're interested in Kanban boards, which is a really new product, that product is on the right. So, and we're working with Cherwell to actually displace JIRA in some places inside of Cherwell with Cherwell and StrataCom's Kanban boards. So that's pretty exciting. Just some other presentations. These should be all on our website. Cherwell upgrade, content upgrades and refreshes. So these are all kind of previous ones that we've done. REST API integrations deep dive, service catalog, done that one a number of different ways. There's a solving performance issues in Cherwell by streamlining workflow that Bill Renfro did. And then performance tuning, which I've done at a lot of user groups, but I've also done it as an advanced practitioner call, and that version is on our website. That one kind of constantly changes, so we may do another one soon with a bunch of updates, new things I've learned about performance tuning in SQL and big data customers, and all of that good stuff. So what are we going to talk about today? Just we'll go through, what parts of Cherwell are customers integrating with Active Directory, and what's the benefit of integrating with Active Directory? Some potential issues with AD integrations for security groups, teams, and customer work groups, and then solution in a full-featured integration between Active Directory and Cherwell, and examples of what I've seen other customers do, how they've integrated Cherwell and Active Directory. Mostly how that coming into Cherwell, not as much going out. I will talk about that a little bit, but. All right, so what are some common Cherwell and Active Directory integrations? So users is really common. They can be imported from Active Directory into Cherwell. security groups. They can be linked like to an LDAP group in Active Directory. Customers can be imported from Active Directory and then given portal credentials based on their AD logins. And really any object can be mapped to an Active Directory object and imported kind of with these import jobs that Cherwell gives you access to. So those are common things. So let's talk about some of the advantages of managing security groups and team membership in Active Directory. So I've worked with some customers completely manage their security groups and team membership. Essentially, they set up in Active Directory organizational units, and they may have like a Cherwell one, and they use that to manage. I'd have like a Cherwell Teams OU, and they'll have all their Cherwell Teams in there, and they want to manage all of that from Active Directory and not in Cherwell. So for many companies, AD groups is how they manage access to corporate applications. So they're doing this for other applications in their organization, and they also want to do it for Cherwell. Some identity governance solutions a bit for identity access management have built-in integrations to Active Directory, but not necessarily a Cherwell plugin. So Cherwell is kind of, I wouldn't call it a fringe application, but it's definitely not as popular as like Active Directory, like Salesforce or SAP, that some of these governance solutions might already have a plugin. Tens or hundreds of thousands of organizations using it. So they've created and generally some of these don't have a Cherwell plugin. So if you're creating the applications, they would have to custom write a plugin for Cherwell. Just easier for the organization to integrate with Active. So team membership and be managed in the Orange client, and many customers would a single team manage all access and Active Directory. So a lot of customers I've worked with have like an identity access management team, and if anybody wants access to an application, they go through that team, and that team gets them access either through a product like SailPoint, which is automating the access by like putting them into a folder in Active Directory, or just doing it themselves, putting somebody into a folder, which hence gives them access to Cherwell. So, and in Cherwell, the team membership, you have to give client. There's probably a way to do it in the blue client, but essentially out of box, you can only update information in the orange clients. And then if you've got like a different group of admins, they've got to get the orange client loaded on their machine and learn how to use it and learn how to add users to these teams. And many times working with organizations, the roles can be consolidated and users can share team and security group. So that means if you're a help desk person, you may be in a help desk OU for help desk, and many applications to give you access to that application. So you might have just different security applications that you're using on the help desk, and so if you stick them in this one folder, then applications can look at that folder to determine who should have access to that application. So just a way for organizations to really streamline their. So what are some of the potential issues with common AD synced items? Cherwell, you can sync with Active, specifically more like team membership and group membership. So when a user is added, it can be added to the proper Cherwell, the Active Directory group. And you look at these security groups, you can see you can tie them to Active Directory, or they call them LDAP. As imported, they can be put. And that's pretty common, and usually people aren't going to change, but I've worked with some organizations where they do have a little more granular, and they might change from like help desk to help desk level 1 to help desk level 2, and people are constantly jumping back and forth, and they have different And when those change, there isn't really a great automated out of security group. So you have to go in and manually change those. And team and work group membership. So for customers that want to manage their team and work, adds and removes are a problem for Cherwell. There's no great out-of-the-box way in Cherwell. Like if you remove a user out of a group in an OU, an Active Directory, there's no great way for Cherwell to know that that person's been removed. You need some sort of a trigger from Active Directory, because once they're gone, even if you're doing imports, once they're gone, that they're not there anymore. So removes are particularly difficult to synchronize between AD and Cherwell. All right, so just some common integrations from Cherwell out to Active Directory. So some of the things I've seen is adding users to Active Directory groups. So patient access. So you may have a service catalog, give somebody application access, and then have an approval on it. And once it's approved, run, say, like a PowerShell script, that will automatically put that user into that group in Active Directory. So that's really common. Accounts we just released in our customer portal add-on, our mobile customer portal, the functionality for a customer to anonymously hit the portal and be authenticated with an SMS text, and then they can create a ticket to unlock their Active Directory user account. Cherwell can fire off then a PowerShell script to unlock their user account, and that can be tied with or no approval. You could just request an unlock, and the PowerShell script can go unlock it. So somebody should be able to get their account unlocked, basically creating a ticket. They just pop their name in, get an SMS text back to verify that it's actually them, and then run a PowerShell script to unlock their user account. Adding new groups to Active Directory, so that's something where some companies manage like new group creation or like distribution list creation from Service Catalog. So if they're managing it with Service Catalog in Cherwell, you can have PowerShell scripts create these new groups or distribution lists in Active Directory, or even adding users to distribution lists or groups. That's a common one, and also giving access to shared folders. So that's something you with PowerShell, Service Catalog for it, and have an approval for it. Once it's approved, the shared folder. So that type of automation out of Cherwell, and fairly easy to set up. It's about what do you want to do, and put it in the Service Catalog and figuring out the script and where it's going to run. And if you're hosted, you've got some other challenges with running those to your environment, but it can be done. All right, so this for integrating Active Directory and Cherwell from Active Directory. So I work with customers integrating Active Directory and Cherwell. I like to use PowerShell because it's ubiquitous, meaning that it is everywhere. You can, like, everybody's got PowerShell on their Windows 10 machine. PowerShell is on every Windows 2016 server or any of the Windows servers, including headless servers. So if you've got servers in your data center that are headless, i.e. they don't have a GUI, they can still run PowerShell scripts. In fact, that's how you work with those headless servers. And it's just PowerShell's got built-in functions for working with Active Directory, and it's got built-in functions for working with REST. So you can poke into Cherwell with PowerShell scripts. So they can be run from one step to automate AD updates from within Cherwell, and PowerShell scripts can update Cherwell records via the REST API call. So, and the nice thing about it is they don't have to run like on the Cherwell server. They can run really anywhere. So I usually encourage customers to run it on, if they've already got some sort of automation server in their environment to run it on that. But a lot of times we just end up running it on the trusted agent server or the actual Cherwell server. But it could actually be run, if you're hosted, it can be run from any machine in your network to integrate these things. So this
Eric, we've got a couple questions.
Oh, yep, sorry, I'm not pausing. Okay.
No problem. These just came in. One person says, in my experience running PowerShell scripts manually via a button, not via an automation process, executes the script locally on their PC, causing issues since the script doesn't exist. Have you ever experienced the same thing, and have you worked around it?
Yeah, so I've seen that before, and usually what I've seen, I haven't experienced personally, but I've seen what some other of my consultants have done, and they've actually put the PowerShell script into the one-step, like the code for the PowerShell script all in the one-step, and then when they run the one-step, they write the PowerShell script out to the local machine, and then they run it. So they're like literally writing the PowerShell script down to the user's machine, and then running the PowerShell script that they just created, and then they remove it after they run it. So they're kind of creating this PowerShell script on demand. So all the code for the PowerShell script is in the one step, and then you just write it out to a file, and then you execute the PS, or I can't remember the executable. You execute the PowerShell executable and pass that file in as a parameter. So that's how I've seen that handled.
Okay, thank you. A couple others that just popped up. The next one is, I am assuming, sorry, my screen just bumped down while someone was asking a question. Okay, shell scripts work better for on-premise installs, not so much for hosted sites?
It doesn't matter. So as far as hosted Cherwell, the PowerShell scripts work great with hosted Cherwell. So because hosted Cherwell has an internet accessible API, so sometimes it's actually easier to work with the hosted. It is for me, scripts like from my workstation without being on the user's VPN, but because it's out, you have a lot of flexibility as where you can run these PowerShell scripts from. So hosted premise, if you're on premise and need to run the script probably on premise for your Active Directory integration, unless you've got Azure. And if you're in the cloud, then you could run it credentials. So, but yeah, PowerShell into hosted or on-prem Cherwell, it doesn't really matter, especially if you're running it from on your network. But it's the same. So it's not any easier if you're on-premise or if you're hosted.
Okay. Another one that just popped up, does StrataCom have experience in creating a link on the Windows logon page that launches a secure browser window to the AD password reset page?
Well, I'll have to put that in Teams. I haven't done that, but I'm sure someone has. Probably just on the portal, are they talking about, or which page did they say?
If you want to put a comment into the questions and let us know the answer to that, we can finish addressing that.
That could be easy from the portal. I don't know about putting it on the regular Cherwell web client page. That might be a little more complex.
Okay, we can come back to that when I see the answer pop in. We have one other question to address before we move on. When writing the PS scripts locally in a one-step, how do you work around the script running with the local user credentials, which probably don't have the proper access?
Yeah, you got to put the credentials that you want into the PowerShell script. So normally when you're accessing, so when you access Active Directory from PowerShell, you're generally passing in credentials to Active Directory in the script. So you're not running it as the user that's running the PowerShell script. So you need to put the credentials for the Active Directory into the script or pass it in as a parameter. So generally PowerShell scripts like this are not going to be run from the client. They're going to be scheduled. So I've got a little diagram here So like the middle box is a Windows server running the PowerShell script. So these are generally going to be scheduled. If you're integrating back into Cherwell, they're going to be scheduled to run nightly or hourly or however often you want to schedule them. If you're doing something like an AD update out of Cherwell into Active Directory, yeah, you've got to have the credentials in the script, which can be, for some companies, putting the credentials into the script might not fly well. I haven't done it before, but I believe there's a way to encrypt the credentials and send encrypted credentials into the PowerShell script. So you may want to look at doing that. The other way to do it would be to have like the automation process server run it kind of in the background. And that's generally what I see is they're run by the automation process server. And then the script can sit on a machine that nobody has access to, and you can have the credentials in there. But yeah, generally these credentials are in the script, or they're passing the script as a parameter and not run as the user that's running the script.
Okay. Going back to the previous question, I'll repeat it to make sure everyone remembers what that was, and we've got the answer you were looking for. So the question was, does StrataCom have experience in creating a link on the Windows logon page that launches a secure browser window to the AD password reset page? This person was referring to the portal page and also mentioned the challenge is not necessarily the AD integration, but adding the feature for a user to access the reset page without having to log on to their PC.
Yeah, I don't know. We can ask and send out. I haven't done it, but probably somebody. I know we've done quite a bit of password reset work off the portal, so I'm sure someone's done it. We can send out the answer, and after this, I'll ask all the consultants and see how they've handled password reset. I know, like on our mobile portal client, of course, we're not using the Cherwell portal, so it's a little different. But yeah, we can put a link in that, or we can just have them create a ticket to get their password reset. But yeah, I don't have any experience with that, but I'm sure other of our consultants do. So we'll send out the answer after this webinar.
Okay. And to the person asking the question, we'll get in touch with you one-on-one as well. Okay. One more question before we move on. It says you can add users to a DL. Will it remove users from the DL?
Oh, sorry, what was that?
The last question was, you can add users to a DL. Will it remove users from the DL?
Yeah, you can remove users from a distribution list too. Yep. The only thing Steve asked me yesterday about updating a global address list from Cherwell, like can that be updated? And that was one thing I wasn't sure. I did a bunch of research on it and it looked like it would only work for on-premise Exchange, but then I did find someone who figured out how to update Office 365 or hosted Exchange and update the global address list too. So yeah, PowerShell's pretty powerful. It's built, by Windows, so it has, or Microsoft, so it has a lot of these. Anything Microsoft, it probably has a hook into. So like distribution lists, you've got add remove capability for that. Global address book refreshes, it's got hooks for that. Group managing groups in AD, it's got hooks for that. So, which is why I really like PowerShell, because it has hooks into all those things. And most of the customers we work with are on Active Directory. So some of these other like third-party SAML providers like Okta, there are probably hooks for that too. I haven't worked with any of those, but that's the main reason I like PowerShell, because it is so powerful to work with Active Directory.
Okay, that clears our questions for now. So let's go ahead with the slides.
Okay. And this is just a simple diagram of how this works. So if we're syncing from Active Directory into Cherwell, the Windows server runs the PowerShell scripts. It reads the information out of Active Directory and then updates Cherwell with API calls. And at the end, ways that I've made this work for customers, this would be the most all-in to managing you know, where you've got an OU for Cherwell and you've got all your teams in Active Directory and you're managing team membership in there, and then you're updating team membership back into Cherwell. So you're basically reading out of Active Directory and updating, removing people out of teams and customer work groups and putting them in, and creating new users, creating new teams and customer work groups, all from this script and all reading out of Active Directory. Okay, so just some tools. So tools in your PowerShell. So PS to me is PowerShell. So tools in your PS toolkit. So here's some commands. If you want to try to tackle this yourself, here's some commands in PowerShell that are pretty easy to use, and you can pull data from AD. So get AD user. That gets the Active Directory information about a specific user. So you just pass in the user's information, and you get all their AD information back, which might be, AD has a lot of information about users. Get AD group, that gets the AD groups in a domain. So if you just ran get AD group, it'd pull every group back, and you can use that to search. You can narrow it with search queries to narrow it to a specific OU. And that's generally if I'm working with a customer that is managing Cherwell teams and work groups and security groups out of Active Directory, they will create an OU just for Cherwell. So then we can just look at that single OU and we can get all the groups out of there, and then we just loop through the groups. And then we use the next function, get AD group member, which gets the AD group membership. So you can pass in a group name to Active Directory, and it'll just give you all the members back. And then you basically have just an array of members, and then you can go through that and you can compare it with Cherwell, like who's in the team, and then you can add people who aren't in the team and remove them if they are in the Cherwell team but not in the Active Directory team. And here's the useful Cherwell API calls. So if you're going to attempt this in PowerShell, you'll probably end up using these API calls. So get teams just gets the list of teams out of Cherwell. So it gives you basically the team ID and the team name, but nothing else. You can get the team information for a single team, just pass in team ID. You can get a user's teams by passing in the user's record ID, their rec ID. So if I wanted all the teams I was a member of, I'd call it get user teams, and you can see that. Not very useful in this scenario, but you may end up using it. Get work groups just gets all the work groups. So of course, work groups and teams are in the same backend Cherwell object, but they have different API calls. So if you do want to manage customer work groups with this, you can do get work groups. And for one customer, I set up customer work groups for all of their distribution lists. So they had thousands and thousands of work groups, and they use that to email customers out of Cherwell. And then you can use the API call remove user from team to remove users from a team, save team member, save work group member, and then add user to a team. And then get users in security group, so that you pull down a security group and see all the users in it. So that's helpful if you're managing your security groups in Active Directory. You can compare the users in the security group in Cherwell with what you have in Active Directory, and then remove or add as necessary. And then some of the issues that I've run into that if you want to try to sync that you will probably also run into. So the biggest issue is that there's no API call in Cherwell to get the members of a work group or team. So if you're looking for, say you have a help desk team in Cherwell, and you want to compare it against your help desk team in your Cherwell OU and Active Directory, there's no easy way to do it. So there's no way to pull back and say, hey, give me all the members of the help desk team. There just isn't an API call for it. It's one of the biggest holes in Cherwell's API. And there just isn't a way to get it. So there's a couple solutions for that. So one of the most common is this view team members view to create that in SQL. And it's basically creating a view, so creating a join, in a bunch of tables, the backend tables, some trebuchet tables, and then you create a Cherwell object over the top of that view. So if you do it with your external data connection, what we call a loopback connector, it's SQL Server. So you create a Cherwell object through an external data connection back to its own SQL Server. And sometimes you have to do this to expose tables that are in Cherwell that are not exposed via like their data definition, or through the Orange client, but you can do that with SQL. So I actually have in this, and you'll be able to download this. So I actually put in the SQL script. It's kind of hard to see here, but I embedded it as an object in here. So if you download this, you can actually get the SQL script to run. And if you're hosted, Cherwell will run that for you, and they'll create that view team members view. Or if you're on premise, you can get your DBA to run that, and then it'll also create that view, and then you can attach to that view with an external data connection. And that will actually give you, once you create an object for that, then you can actually use that view team members. You can pass in a parameter, like create a search and pass in a parameter of team, and it'll give you all the members for that team. So that's what I like most. So usually customers I work with, we will set that up because it's really simple. The other way to do it is to use the get user teams, and you loop through that for every single user, and you build like a structured array or kind of a multi-column array in memory, and then you parse through that. So I have done that before, but it gets really complex if you're doing a lot of updates, because you tend to do that when you first fire up the PowerShell script. You'll do that to kind of cache this list of teams and users. But the problem is if you're updating and removing users from teams in Cherwell, you have to remember to update your array. Otherwise, your array will get out of sync, or you need to rerun that array every time you do an update, which kind of stinks because it can take, if you've got, I don't know, 500 Cherwell users, it can take 30 seconds to a minute to run that, to cache all those records. So that's actually what we do for like our mobile and Kanban and mobile portal is we actually cache that information when the user logs in, but we're not updating team membership, so we don't have to worry about it changing very often. So that gets cached when the user logs in. So in any application that you work with again, Cherwell via the API, you're going to have this issue if you need to do, like for us in mobile, if you pick a team and then want to pick the team members underneath it. I mean, there's no API call to do it, so we kind of had to do a caching mechanism to cache all those items. So that's probably the biggest problem in syncing this data up that you'll run into. So in this view team members, it's pretty simple. It's kind of a ubiquitous solution that a lot of other partners use. We're not the only partner that use that. Like I said, I've got the code in here that you can run to create that. So it's pretty handy to have if you're doing any API work against Cherwell at all. You'll end up using this.
Eric, we've got a question.
Okay.
We have our customers organized by OU groups. Is there a way to organize them the same way in Cherwell? For example, all people in group 1 that have submitted an incident.
So you could put them in customer work groups. That's probably so they must have a bunch of, so they're in an OU, or are they in different OU? Could you read the question again?
Yep. We have our customers organized by OU groups. Is there a way to organize them the same way in Cherwell?
Yeah, customer work groups is really probably the only way. You could also put a field like on the customer record that says what OU group they're in, and you could do it that way. So that would be a little easier to run reports against because you would just have a field that says, hey, this customer's in this OU group. Now, if they're in multiple groups, you'd have an issue, which sometimes they are, sometimes they're not. I'd say if they're just in one AD OU group, I'd probably do the field. And then you wouldn't even have to do this PowerShell. You could just import that. Let's see, could you import that? You might have to use PowerShell to update it because most customers are importing from Active Directory, but I don't think there's going to be a way to update that field during that, with that Cherwell import out of the scheduler. I think you might have to run a PowerShell script to update that, but you could run that nightly. The other option would be the customer work group. You put everybody into a customer work group. I don't know what the benefit of that would be unless they're in multiple OU groups. Then you could have them, and they could easily be in multiple customer work groups. And customers I've worked with before that want to do that, we just completely sync it with Active Directory then. So we just run the script through Active Directory, and if there's 100 or 200 or 1,000 groups, we just generate those customer work groups and put all the people in there, and then every hour, every night, we just synchronize those. I got one customer where it actually takes 20 some hours to run because they've got thousands and thousands of work groups, and some of those work groups actually have the entire company in them because they're universal distribution lists, so they have like 13,000 records in each customer work group. So it does take almost a day to synchronize their customer work group. So but yeah, and I think either one, you're probably gonna have to script it out. I don't think there's a great way, unless somebody else on the call knows, I don't think there's a great way to pull in the group out of the OU that they're in when you import that customer into Cherwell. I think that would have to be an external update you do with something like PowerShell.
Okay, I don't see any additional comments from anyone on that yet. There was another question that popped up though. They're wondering if we will be making the PowerShell script available to attendees.
So is there another question besides that one? I mean, I can talk about that one, but it's kind of my next slide. Okay, so yeah, my next slide talks about our solution. So we've got about 1,200 lines of code that we've written for these PowerShell updates. And generally, how we're doing these we're just doing it as an engagement where we come in and implement the PowerShell script. So we're not going to open source this PowerShell script or anything like that. So it is kind of our proprietary code that we've written, but it's got all the functions built in to basically do all of these things, and then you take the functions and put them together. So generally just a couple days for us usually to implement this. I'd say 2 days to a week, kind of depending on the complexity of it. So and I'll talk about some of the different ways we've implemented this. So this PowerShell script is kind of just the building blocks. So it probably took me I wrote this, so it took me about 5 weeks to write this, all these functions, and test them and make sure they all work and implement them with a few customers. So I probably worked on it for about 5 weeks, but keep in mind, it does everything. It syncs security groups and teams and work groups, and it does adds, removes, and like every function you could ever want is in there. So if we do implement it, then I usually implement with the full code base. So if you did want to enhance it later on, you could. So if you just wanted to start with teams and wanted to move on with work groups, you'd have all the functions for work groups in there that you could do. But and because it's in PowerShell, it's really flexible, of course, so it's a programming language. So you have to kind of, if you want to pick it up and do it yourself, like after we implement it, you have to know a little bit about programming, but PowerShell is pretty easy. Of course, it's not as easy as Cherwell, but for me, who had never used PowerShell before I wrote this script, I thought I'd done a lot of .NET programming and things, so I understood a lot of the concepts in PowerShell, but it is just a kind of a scripting language. Okay, so some examples of customer implementations of this. So I had one customer with 5 domains. So Cherwell security groups and teams were in one domain, and then all their customer work groups were managed across all 5 domains. So we used the email distribution lists as customer work groups. So they ended up using those to send emails basically to customers via Cherwell. So those are synchronized. But we did that across multiple domains. And in order for that to work, we had one service account that had 5 domains, but we're basically pointing at 5 different endpoints or to get that plug in those domains. And one other interesting thing because the Cherwell security groups and teams were in a single domain, they had people from other domains in the groups in the main domain. So we had to figure out what domain they were in to go look them up to get the information on their phone number. That was all stored in a different domain. So that was pretty complex, but all these hooks in the Active Directory, so it made it fairly. I modified this for another customer that had all their team information managed app that So they were able to just create an external data connection to the server, and we connected. We put a Cherwell object over it, and then I just parsed through that Cherwell object just like it would run through Active Directory. So I pulled all the records out of that database and compared. So it was by team basically. So I could pull it out, and then I had to compare against what was in Cherwell. So I could drop users out of Cherwell that dropped out of in this other system. So and the only thing I'll say about that is that there was a problem once with the view where like only half the people were pulled in, and it ran one night and pulled half. This is when we were still testing. So if you do that, you need that application is stable, and that the view that generated isn't going to give you half. And to fix that view to give them full results, and that we just reran it instead. You can always have issues when you're relying on another system to provide your Cherwell data, and we didn't really have any counting in there or anything to say, hey, if 100 people are removed, stop the program. We just didn't expect that, but that's essentially what happened. So, but we did end up fixing there ever since for over a year with no issues. And then hybrid Active Directory. So if you've got that is storing the Active Directory name in the Cherwell team, so kind of I'm scanning Cherwell, looking at all the teams, pulling the Active Directory name, pulling in the team membership, and then comparing it against the team membership in Cherwell. So the teams in Cherwell do not have the same name as the groups in Active Directory, which normally they would if we were just reading out of an OU and generating those teams in Cherwell from the OU. They would have to match, or you'd have to put like a Cherwell team name in Active Directory that you wanted to call the Cherwell. We're going a little bit backwards. We're looking in Cherwell, and then we're saying, hey, what is the Active Directory team? I pull the membership out of there, and then I'm updating the membership in the team. So the only you're still having to create the teams in Cherwell. So you can't auto-create this way because the Active Directory information is stored in the Cherwell. We're just manually generating the teams in Cherwell, and then putting the Active Directory name into Cherwell, and then we're looking at Cherwell to get the Active Directory team name, looking up the users in the group in Active Directory, and then comparing with Cherwell and team members. So the nice thing about this is you don't have to have a special OU for Cherwell team. So you don't have to create like a Cherwell OU and put all your teams in there. So this customer is managing directory, but they don't have like a specific Cherwell spot for it. So for us to read out of their Active Directory and create Cherwell teams, it wouldn't be mixed with all these other teams. So this is a good way to do that, which is how they're managing group membership in Active Directory now without having to move a bunch of groups into a Cherwell. So they're probably sharing groups across multiple applications. So so just some final thoughts on this. I wondered how long this was going to take. 45 minutes already. Okay, so I found it easiest to schedule the PowerShell from on Windows. Although you can technically run PowerShell on Linux machines now with .NET open sourced. And .NET Core being able to run on Linux, but generally going to run this from Windows. Running the AD functions in PowerShell does require that the machine has the Active Directory features loaded. So there are hooks in PowerShell that require, especially on like Windows Server. I believe Windows 10 has them built in, but or you can easily download in your PowerShell environment. Server, you actually have to go into the roles and features in order to use them from PowerShell and on a Windows server. So that's why our hosted customers, we are running this on the Trusted Agent server just because it's already allocated to. There's really no other special reason to run it on the Trusted Agent server other than the fact it's already allocated to the Cherwell. They're monitored usually and people know if it goes away because they can't do other things. If they're on premise, you have a little more flexibility where it can, not actually more flexibility, but you've got probably more Cherwell infrastructure. You've probably got like web servers and application server. So you could run it on any one of them. You have to load those features, the Active Directory features in Windows in order for the PowerShell to run. You do need admin access to that machine, or at least an account that features. So usually if I work with a customer, the machine where I'm going to write this on should have those loaded for testing, and the machine that's going to run on has to have those. Generally scheduled to run overnight. That usually is sufficient for most customers. If they're doing a lot of group changes during the day, they could manually sync that to just update a single. You just search your OUs for a single group and run that. Now, it probably only takes 5 seconds, maybe, probably less than that even. So you could run that on demand, or I have some customers that just agent server and kick the Windows process off to resynchronize. So generally, and you can break these up. So like I'll break it up. It's in one script and workgroup updates in the other. So maybe they just run workgroup updates nightly, but they're running team updates hourly or 4 times a day or something like that. Like if they know they changed a bunch. And sometimes that happens, or you get an influx of new employees on a certain there that day, so you can just run it on demand. Okay, so that's it. So that's good to know. It's about 45 minutes. Your group or something. I don't know how long it takes. Do we have any more questions, Laura?
I haven't seen anything else flow in, so if you do have other questions for Eric, now is the time to pop those in. We'll leave the lines open for another minute. So you'll get your questions together and answer them. Again, there's a question, orange box with a white arrow if you click on that. So enter your questions now, please, before we sign off. All right.
A lot of customers have like IAM or like identity access management projects going on, and that's a lot of times we run into this during that, where they'll be implementing a product like SailPoint and they want to manage people's access, and they want to do it all through a single tool, identity access tool. And a lot of times this is where we run into customers saying, oh, I need to manage my Cherwell team membership and security group membership now in Active Directory. Identity access management solution, which integrates to Active Directory. So if you work in a company that's doing that, then this might be special interest to you, because that's a lot of times where we see this have identity access management implementation.
Okay. Comment. It's worth noting that if you have Windows 10 machines that were upgraded from Windows 7, there are known problems and PowerShell might still need to be reinstalled.
Oh, that's interesting. Okay, well, good to know. So if you're on Windows 10 upgraded from Windows 7, you might need to do a PowerShell reinstallation. I hadn't heard that one before.
Okay. The question I have here is, what if we only want the AD security groups sync with Cherwell Teams? Would you customize the engagement accordingly?
Engagement is tailored to what the customer wants. So, yeah, one little. Of course, the less you want the thing, yeah, you're looking at a shorter amount of time. We'd have to talk to find out exactly how your Active Directory set up and how Cherwell set up and exactly what you want. You have all the functions available, but usually it's exactly what they want. So if they just want security groups and teams.
Okay. And the comment about the Windows 10 consultant on our staff, just FYI.
Oh, yeah. Show off.
The next I have only one question in the queue right now. Questions, now is the time to enter those, as we'll close our webinar after this next question if there's nothing else. The last question I have here is this integration solution a fixed cost or scoped?
It's scoped. It's not, we can't really do it. I'd love to do it as a fixed price, but because everything is so different for the customer and scope it out, we kind of do a fixed price scope a bit on it, but I can't say, oh, it's $5,000 or $2,500 or, because it's just too difficult to know, because of all the differences, how many domains someone has, are their OUs the same name as their Cherwell Teams, what have you done? So there's just a lot of variables that play into it. So initially I'm kind of offering where we just come in and charge one price, but it's just too difficult. And then some of them are going to be super easy, and then the customer would be like, why did I pay hours? And some of them might is you know, the SQL one, I think I worked 4 or 5 days on. It was take that long. I've gotten the toolkit and have to build or something like that. It can take a little. Generally, these are going to be 2 days-ish, 2 to 3 days-ish to implement for a customer.
Okay, I think that's really helpful. I don't have any other questions. Close the webinar. If you want to, Eric, if you wanted to go back to the contact slide, closing things out, feel free to either reach out to myself or Steve Day if you're interested in learning more with our team. As I mentioned at the beginning, we did record this session, so sometime next week we'll be emailing you with the recorded links so you can watch this again. And for everyone who's signed up, we'll also email you the slide deck so that you have that information at the same time as well. For joining us today. Hopefully we'll have another advanced practitioner call in the next couple months, but until then, we hope you all stay very where you are, and we look forward to. Thanks, Eric.